tax credit.
When I delivered my State of the State back in January, I told people that we would keep our promises and deliver on those promises.
And one of those he promised was to give $50 million to a tax credit to open up school choice across Idaho. Governor Brad Little delivering a recap of those promises made, promises kept, from the driveway of his chief of staff's childhood home in Nampa. But as Zach Haug's mom told assembled reporters, the lane they live on is more like a busy byway these days. So apologies ahead of time for the planes and trucks soundtrack of the 2025 post-legislative press conference. The governor spoke for about 4 minutes this afternoon before taking questions from reporters, recalling the accomplishments of the session. That would be a balanced budget, which is required by the state constitution. He mentioned Medicaid cost containment, Idaho infrastructure, saying the state's going to bond for an additional $1 billion in road projects across the state. Governor Little, though, wanted to focus and narrow his focus today to tax cuts and public schools. He pointed to increased funding for rural public schools to the tune of $50 million, an $85 million increase in teacher pay that Aspen kind of touched on, and $78 million investment to make sure Idaho kids can read proficiently by the 3rd grade. Then there were the more than $400 million in tax relief for Idahoans, from income tax to property tax to adjusting the grocery tax. And then, of course, the $50 million tax credit for families paying for private school or homeschool, where tax cuts and school funding those are where those kind of things come together, right? Tax cuts and school funding. House Bill 93 offers homeschool or private school families up to $5,000 per student in tax credits, $7,500 for kids with special needs. The bill capped that credit at $50 million and prioritizes those families making less than 300% of the federal poverty level, which for a family of 4 right now is less than $96,450. Well, just before the end of the session, Governor Little told reporters the only thing he liked about that bill, he really agreed with, was the price of it, the $50 million. A lack of accountability for private schools or homeschool families taking state money was the biggest issue, though, many had with that bill. Yet Governor Little signed it into law. And today, for the first time, he justified giving it his signature.
There was negotiations all along. At one point in time, there was very little review of how the money was spent. I think there was like 1 position over the tax commission. We got that moved up to 6. The other thing is we capped it. The other part of it was we means tested it. There's a certain level, if you have income over a certain level, you won't qualify. And then we overweighted it for disadvantaged students. Those were all components of what I asked for. I would have done it a little differently, but literally everything I get from the legislature, I would have done a little differently. That's part of our constitutional process.
And yes, no bill is perfect, we know this, but this one had big questions from the beginning, from that lack of accountability to the funding, which many critics point out will end up taking money away from public schools, i.e. that lack of attendance. And not qualifying because families make too much, that isn't exactly accurate. While low income is the priority, it opens up to anyone after that. And that funding has even hit a couple of bumps along the road. What was supposed to be just a one-time cost of $125,000 to get the application process up and running and require just 2 full-time employees at the tax commission has ballooned to 7 tax commission full-time employees and a cost of $670,000 to pay for that, which would drop tax credit availability accordingly. So not necessarily $50 million, but about $49.3 million. So there's no such thing as a perfect bill, even when it comes to what it will ultimately cost the state.
A piece of legislation that looks good today, all of a sudden you look at it in 2 or 3 years and says that's cost us a lot more money than we anticipated.
Well, critics can say that about the school choice tax credit bill, or maybe even a bill without an anticipated fiscal impact, like the flag law, which restricts what flags can fly on government property. It's become a bit of a legal boondoggle for law enforcement, costing time and money to try to enforce, and something Governor Little says we aren't done with yet.
I supported it, I signed it. I was aware that it didn't have any kind of a penalty in it. I'm quite certain it's going to come back next year.
So how do you think it's playing out now? You think it's going to have to be settled in the legislature?
Oh, yeah.
Or if not in a court of law prior to that. Well, it wasn't an accomplishment because the bill to create an Idaho version of DOGE did fail this past session. About a week after they went home for the year, Idaho GOP leaders announced they were going to start their own Department of Government Efficiency Task Force, a joint task force set on streamlining Idaho's government spending by focusing on consolidating state agencies when they can, reducing unnecessary employee travel, and just cutting jobs altogether. something the task force claims hasn't been done since 1974 under then Governor Cecil Andrus. Well, today's Governor, Brad Little, said there's nothing wrong with looking in a mirror once every few decades.
You know, my first reaction is, as a Republican, we've been in charge for 30 years. If we're inefficient, it's our fault. You can always get to be more efficient. And that is a constant process.
And that process, or at least the cut, seemed pretty constant for the first couple of months of Trump's second go at it this time around. Several of those DOGE gashes trickling down to the Gem State through Forest Service employees, nonprofit grants, agencies that help combat homelessness, poverty, even the Idaho Humanities Council and Veterans Affairs feeling it. But Governor Brad Little, who reiterated he's all in for cutting fat, had this to say about the federal cuts coming to Idaho.
I haven't seen anything that rises to the magnitude that is something that we need to be urgently concerned about. But I can tell you that most people in Idaho agree that the federal government spends too much money, and if we think we're going to be totally immune to it, I understand, obviously, the administration and Congress we need to dial back spending and get this federal deficit under control.
So that was kind of how it all played out this afternoon, or this morning actually, on that driveway. Governor Little did mention his $75 million launch program at least 4 times during this press conference, calling it the defining piece of this legislative session at one point, and at the same time, a top priority going into next session. This is the program that pays for post-secondary education for Idaho high school graduates to learn a trade. Governor Little says he wanted to expand that capacity to 15,000 awards this past session, but he only got 10. So he's going to try it again next session. Wait, hold on. Just because we're going to break doesn't mean it's time for you to take a break. Now is the time for you to join the 208 conversation. We want your comments, your questions, and sometimes your concerns. Send them to the number on your screen, 208-321-5614. As always, include your name and the hashtag the 208, and you might see yours at the end of the show.